Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever watched your partner get just completely swept up by an idea that seemed to quit their job and start an alpaca farm, or maybe something smaller like a sudden intense dive into a hobby that takes over the whole house?
Definitely. If that sounds familiar, you are absolutely not alone. It's a really common thing in relationships.
And it can be super confusing
Yeah.
and frustrating. You're left standing there thinking, what is happening? And how do we even respond to this?
Exactly. It's that moment where their focus gets so intense on something that from the outside looks maybe impractical or even a bit bizarre.
So today, we're really going to dive into that. We're looking at this whole dynamic using insights from Linda, who's a neuro coach over at TBC Coaching. She's got some great guidance on basically how to stay grounded when your partner seems to be, spiraling off somewhere with an idea.
Yeah, her work gives us a really helpful framework.
Our mission here today is pretty simple, really. We want to try and understand what might actually be going on for your partner in those moments. And maybe more importantly, how you can navigate it without losing your own footing.
Right, because it's easy to get pulled in.
Yeah.
Linda's perspective is super valuable here. Maybe we should start by talking about the kinds of situations we actually mean, these spirals, as you called them.
Yeah, let's paint a picture. Linda's guidance mentions a bunch of really relatable examples like the sudden urgent need to quit a stable job for that alpaca farm dream I mentioned.
Or deciding overnight to move completely off grid.
Totally. Or maybe less extreme, but still intense, like those impulsive big purchases for a hobby they just discovered yesterday.
Or the conviction they can write an entire novel in, like, a week.
Yes. Or suddenly adopting an extremely restrictive diet, or deciding they absolutely must confront someone from their distant past, like right now.
Even things like getting intensely drawn into, say, conspiracy theories or really obscure health protocols.
Or even just, that late night burst of energy where they suddenly decide to rearrange all the living room furniture at 1 a.m.
Right. The common thread, Linda points out in all of these, it's this mix of, like, cognitive urgency this has to happen.
That's urgency.
And this deep emotional certainty. Plus, there's often this internal logic that just seems impenetrable from the outside. It kind of blocks out anything you might say.
It's like they're completely convinced. And Lynn explains that from their point of view, this idea often brings something positive, right? Like a feeling of order or maybe possibility or even escape.
Exactly. It might actually be acting as a kind of solution to some deeper need or stress that maybe they haven't even articulated, even to themselves.
So internally, it feels like this moment of brilliant clarity.
Right. Total clarity. But externally, to us, it can look like pure impulsivity or, maybe even fantasy.
And that mismatch is where the problems start. Because our first instinct is often,
To use logic.
yeah, exactly, to point out the flaws, the practical issues, why it maybe won't work.
Which, Linda's work really highlights this, can completely backfire.
Right. Why is that? Why doesn't logic cut through immediately?
Well, in that moment of intense focus, your partner probably isn't hearing your logic as care or helpfulness. Instead, it can feel like a challenge, like you're rejecting their idea, maybe even rejecting them or trying to control them.
Okay, so it triggers defensiveness.
Big time. Which just slams the door on any kind of productive conversation. That immediate, "Are you serious? That's crazy," reaction.
Okay.
Probably not the best move.
Definitely not. Okay, so if logic isn't the first step, what does Linda suggest? What's the alternative?
She talks a lot about the power of stepping back, just pausing.
Stepping back, okay.
Now, she's very clear this doesn't mean you agree with the idea. It's not enabling something potentially harmful.
Right, it's not endorsement.
No, it's more about allowing their brain the space it needs to process without you adding extra emotional fuel to the fire. Think of it like letting their nervous system have a chance to settle.
That is so interesting because it feels completely counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Totally.
Our gut reaction is to engage, to argue, to try and pull them back to, reality as we see it.
Right. But Linda's point is that giving that space, actively not challenging the fixation head on, often allows the intensity to just naturally decrease on its own.
So the idea might just sort of fizzle out
Yeah.
or change.
Yeah, exactly. It might evolve into something more manageable or become less urgent or sometimes just fade away entirely as their internal state shifts and that initial intense need driving it lessens.
So maybe it's not always about them being stubborn or deliberately ignoring us.
Usually not. Linda offers this really useful reframe. Think of it less as arrogance or entitlement and more as potentially neurological overload.
Neurological overload, okay.
Yeah, manifesting as this really strong conviction. They might actually be trying, maybe unconsciously, to find a sense of safety or order in a world that feels overwhelming or confusing.
And the idea, however wild it seems, becomes a temporary anchor.
Precisely. A way to feel grounded, even if just for a moment.
That makes a lot more sense when you frame it as a response to overwhelm. And Linda's guidance also delves into how different neurotypes might experience these kinds of intense fixations. That part was really fascinating.
Yeah, it really adds another layer of understanding. She talks about autism, ADHD, PDA, pathological demand avoidance, and RSD, which is rejection-sensitive dysphoria.
Let's unpack those a bit. For someone on the autism spectrum, for example.
Linda explains that thinking can often rely heavily on internal logic systems. So when an idea clicks and makes sense within that internal framework, it can feel incredibly stabilizing.
Like finding a piece that fits perfectly.
Exactly. And so challenging that logic doesn't feel like a discussion. It can feel like an attack on that stability, on that order, which can trigger anxiety or panic, not reflection. The brain kind of latches onto what feels grounding.
Right, it's hard to let go of that stability. And then with ADHD, we often think of impulse and speed.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got potentially rapid thoughts, maybe emotional dysregulation playing a part, and often a really strong drive to act now.
That now or never feeling.
Exactly. There might be less space, especially under stress, for fully assessing outcomes. The brain might sort of cling to ideas that feel exciting or hopeful, maybe for that dopamine hit, or to avoid a perceived failure or boredom.
Okay, in PDA, Linda makes a point that it's not just defiance.
That's such a crucial distinction. PDA isn't about wanting to be difficult. It's an anxiety-driven need to avoid demands and perceived loss of control. And this includes internal demands, too.
So even our well-meaning suggestions.
Can feel like intense pressure, like a demand that triggers a panic response, a need to resist to maintain autonomy. And this can be even stronger in close relationships, where suggestions might feel tied up with identity, connection, freedom. It gets complicated.
Wow, yeah, that really changes the perspective. And RSD, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, I feel like many people experience aspects of this, even without a specific diagnosis.
Absolutely. With RSD, feedback, even gentle critique can be physically and emotionally painful. It's experienced as intense rejection.
So questioning their big idea isn't just questioning the idea.
No, it can land as, you think I'm stupid, or you think I'm incapable, or you don't believe in me. The brain interprets it as confirmation of being unworthy or unlovable.
Which leads to shame.
Yeah, deep shame. And that can cause them to double down defensively or change the subject or just shut down completely to avoid more of that painful feeling. The emotional pain is very real.
So looking across these neurotypes, the common thread seems to be this heightened nervous system response, either to perceived threats to stability, autonomy, or self-worth.
That's a great way to put it. And this leads right into the role of the amygdala, the brain's threat detector.
Right, the fight, flight, freeze center.
Exactly. Linda emphasizes that when someone's deep in one of these intense fixations, their amygdala is likely running the show. Their nervous system is in a protective state.
Meaning logic and reasoning are basically offline.
Pretty much. They're just not available for that kind of rational discussion because the system is wired to reject interference, anything perceived as a threat to their current anchor point.
Okay, so try to break through with reason is essentially futile in that moment.
Worse than futile, it can actually escalate things. Linda suggests our primary role then isn't to be the voice of reason, but to avoid adding more pressure, to not fuel that threat response.
By stepping back, like we talked about.
Exactly. When we lean out instead of leaning in, when we don't engage in the argument, we take pressure off their emotional accelerator. It gives their limbic system a chance to calm down.
And that creates an opening.
An opening for regulation,
Yeah.
for their thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, to potentially come back online. But, and this is key,
It happens on their timeline, not ours.
precisely, Linda really stresses this, we can't rush their internal process. It might take hours, maybe days, sometimes longer for that intensity to naturally subside. Their system needs to run its course.
And when we do see a shift, when maybe they start talking about the idea differently or seem less attached to it,
That's where Linda talks about the soft return. It's a really crucial moment.
how we respond then matters a lot.
Immensely. If they start to soften their stance, maybe express doubts or just talk about it less intensely, Linda advises meeting them with a really calm, neutral response.
No, I told you so.
Definitely no, I told you so. Or even obvious relief, like, oh, thank goodness you're seeing sense. That can feel shaming or make them feel judged for the earlier intensity.
So which we do.
Just be neutral, maybe kind. A simple okay or thanks for sharing that works. It basically teaches their nervous system that it's safe to be flexible, that changing their mind doesn't lead to being diminished or criticized.
That makes sense. It reinforces safety around vulnerability. And during that whole intense period before the soft return, should we just stay silent about our own opinions?
Pretty much, unless they explicitly ask you, hey, what do you actually think about this? Linda suggests holding back your input. Because offering unsolicited advice or opinions when they're in that state can just feel like more pressure, more interference. Your silence, in a way, can be a form of trust.
Trusting them to work through it.
Yeah. And when they do ask for your thoughts, that's often a really good sign. It suggests their executive functions are coming back online, they're more regulated, and actually capable of receiving input. Until then, quiet presence can be more supportive than words.
This whole approach, it really shifts the dynamic, doesn't it? It's less about trying to manage or fix our partner.
And much more about managing our own response, creating an environment that feels safer for both people. And crucially, Linda emphasizes that we absolutely have to look after ourselves in this process, too.
Because it can be draining.
Yeah.
And maybe feel lonely or dismissive when your partner is so intensely focused elsewhere.
Absolutely. Linda's very clear. You are not responsible for their internal processing, but you are responsible for your own well-being. It's completely okay and normal to feel affected, to feel stressed, confused, invisible, whatever it is.
It's okay to need space yourself.
Yes. And it's okay to set boundaries. Calmly saying something like, I hear this is really important to you right now, but I need to take a break from this topic for a bit. Can we talk later when we're both feeling calmer?
That sounds healthy.
It is. It's not just self-care. It actually models self-trust and healthy communication for your partner, too.
And doing this consistently, this non-reactive boundary setting, it has long-term benefits.
Definitely. Linda suggests it helps build a relationship where disagreement doesn't automatically equal disconnection, where boundaries aren't seen as betrayal. It creates more resilience. But she also really validates how hard it can be for you while they're processing.
Yeah, that feeling of being in limbo or ignored.
Those feelings are real and significant. They matter. And Linda encourages listeners to actively use self-care strategies during those times.
Like what?
Things like journaling it out, letting yourself cry if you need to, talking to a trusted friend, someone outside the situation, or even just physical activity like going for a run or doing something physical to release that pent-up tension and stress.
So the goal isn't to be some kind of emotionless robot.
Not at all. It's about managing your own nervous system activation so you don't get sucked into their intensity loop and make things worse for everyone, including yourself. Regulating yourself gives you permission to step out of the chaos, essentially.
Okay, so bringing it all together, Linda gives us some really practical steps, like a checklist almost.
Yeah, she summarizes it really well.
Yeah.
There are 12 key actions. You ready?
Let's hear them.
Okay. 1, pause your response. Just take a breath.
Simple, but hard.
Totally. 2, lean out instead of leaning in. Create that distance. 3, hold a calm, neutral tone if you do speak.
Got it.
4, acknowledge their intensity or the idea's importance to them without agreeing with the content, like, wow, you feel really strongly about this.
Okay. Number 5.
Create space, emotional or physical.
Mhm.
Take that break if you need it. 6, don't offer input unless you're explicitly invited.
Resist the urge to fix.
Exactly. 7, let the idea run its internal course. Trust their process. 8, be ready for that soft return and meet it neutrally.
No, I told you so.
9, hold your own boundaries calmly if needed. 10, validate your own experience. Your feelings are real.
Super important.
11, maybe journal about it afterward. What happened? How did you feel? How did you respond? What could you do differently next time? And 12, practice nervous system, care for yourself. Deep breaths, walk, whatever works for you.
That's a really solid list.
Yeah,
It all seems geared towards creating that nervous system safety for both people.
precisely. It's about co-regulation, sending consistent messages of acceptance of the person, regardless of the sometimes bewildering ideas they might be intensely focused on at any given moment.
So the big takeaway here seems to be that understanding the why, the potential neurological drivers behind these intense fixations, can fundamentally shift how we respond.
Yes, it moves us from frustration or judgment towards maybe more understanding, more effective strategies, and it protects our own well-being in the process.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you think about these patterns, maybe in your partner, consider how this lens might also offer insights into your own moments of intense focus or deep conviction.
That's interesting.
When you get really locked on to something, what might be happening beneath the surface for you? What needs might that intense focus be meeting?
That's a really powerful question to sit with, something to explore.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive today.
Thanks for the great conversation.